Imagine a brand new high-speed global sport has just been invented.
Right.
It's, incredibly fast. It doesn't recognize international borders, and nobody has ever seen anything quite like it before.
Like a completely blank slate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But now, look at how the referees are handling it. Over in the European Union, the referees are sitting at a desk writing a 500-page rule book before a single player is even allowed to step onto the grass.
Yeah, totally locking it down.
Right. And then over in the UK, the referees are pulling the players aside and saying, look, just use the existing rules of soccer. I know you're holding a completely different ball, but just pretend it's soccer.
Which is an interesting visual.
It is. And then you have the United States. In the US, the referees are letting absolutely everyone run out onto the field and play however they want, but
there's a catch.
A huge catch. They are throwing massive career-ending penalty flags after a goal has already been scored.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because today, we are taking a deep dive into the invisible global war over the rules of digital finance and tokenization.
The real battleground.
Right, because the biggest fight happening right now isn't over the blockchain technology itself, it's over who actually gets to control it and, how it affects you, the listener.
That sports analogy captures the sheer absurdity of the current landscape perfectly, honestly. What's fascinating here is that we are looking at a fundamental, almost tectonic friction point.
Okay, how so?
Well, tokenization, which is essentially taking a real-world asset like a bond, a piece of real estate, or, say, a share in a private fund, and representing its ownership as a digital token on a blockchain.
Right, taking physical value and making it digital.
Exactly. And by its very nature, that is borderless. The technology, it doesn't know if you were sitting in London, Tokyo, or New York.
The code just executes.
Right, but regulation is strictly aggressively local.
It's tied to geography.
Completely.
Yeah.
So what you just described with the referees, those are three distinct philosophies. You have structure, you have innovation, and you have enforcement.
Structure, innovation, and enforcement. Got it.
And those three approaches are actively competing right now to define the entire future of global markets.
So if we want to understand how this global competition is playing out, we really have to look at the players.
Let's do it.
And to do that, let's start with the jurisdiction taking the absolute most aggressive, forward-leaning stance right now, which is the European Union.
The architect.
Yes, exactly. They are essentially playing the role of the architect here. They're looking at this new sport and deciding, well, we're just going to build an entirely new stadium from scratch.
Before anyone plays.
Right. Their core philosophy seems to be, if tokenization is inevitable, we need to regulate it early, clearly, and uniformly across all member states.
That is the absolute driving force behind their strategy. The EU is not interested in waiting around to see how the market naturally evolves.
They don't want to see what happens.
No, not at all. They want the infrastructure poured in concrete today. And the crown jewel of this architectural effort is a piece of legislation called MiCA.
Which is the Markets in Crypto Assets Regulation, right?
That's the one. And calling it a rule book almost does it a disservice. I mean, it is a massive, comprehensive framework.
Like an encyclopedia.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It creates very hard legal definitions for digital assets. It outlines incredibly strict licensing requirements for anyone operating in the space.
And consumer protections, I imagine.
Oh, heavy consumer protections. For instance, it has specific, detailed rules governing stablecoins.
Okay, what kind of rules?
Basically demanding that issuers hold massive audited reserves. They're doing everything possible so we don't see another digital bank run.
Which makes sense, but MiCA is just the baseline, right? Because the sources also dig into something called the DLT Pilot Regime.
Yes.
And from what I gather, DLT stands for Distributed Ledger Technology. So what exactly is a pilot regime in this context?
Think of it as a highly monitored, state-sanctioned testing ground. So MiCA handles the everyday crypto assets, but the DLT Pilot Regime, that's a specific environment designed exclusively for traditional financial instruments that have been tokenized.
Traditional instruments, like what?
We are talking about tokenized equities, tokenized government bonds, tokenized money market funds, the heavy hitters.
Wow, okay.
The EU essentially created a legal sandbox. It allows financial institutions to actually trade and settle these blockchain-based securities.
But with supervision.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Within a perimeter where the regulators are watching every single move They're learning alongside the market
Well,
participants.
hold on. I need to challenge this approach for a second.
Go for it.
Because it feels completely counterintuitive to the technology itself. I mean, one of the biggest selling points of blockchain and tokenization has always been velocity.
Speed.
Yeah. It's supposed to be frictionless, agile, moving value around the globe at the speed of an email. So, doesn't building this massive, slow-moving, heavy regulatory infrastructure totally stifle the very agility that makes the tech valuable in the first place?
I see where you're going with this.
I mean, to use another analogy, it feels like we finally invented a spaceship, and the EU's very first instinct is to slap a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit on it.
That is a very fair critique, and honestly, it's a tension that blockchain developers feel deeply right now. But we have to look at the underlying mechanics of why the EU is doing this.
Okay, why?
Because this heavy, methodical structure provides something that massive traditional financial institutions value above absolutely everything else.
Which is?
Regulatory certainty. You have to remember, major banks, pension funds, huge asset managers, they're not going to move billions of dollars of real institutional value onto a public blockchain if they think the rules might just change on a Tuesday.
So they are trading speed for a safety net.
Exactly that. The EU's approach might be slow to build, and it is undeniably expensive and honestly cumbersome for a startup to navigate initially.
A huge barrier to entry.
It is. But once you have that license, it guarantees stability. It gives issuers and investors a predictable legal floor to stand on.
Because you've jumped through all the hoops.
Right. If you play by their massive rule book, you know you aren't going to get shut down overnight.
Okay, I see the appeal for a massive traditional bank. That totally makes sense. But if the EU's approach takes years to build and requires armies of compliance lawyers, what happens to the innovators?
They look elsewhere.
Right. What happens to the startup that wants to launch a tokenized private credit fund next month? They can't afford to wait for the concrete to dry.
No, they cannot.
So they're going to look for a middle ground. And logically, based on our sources, that takes us right across the English Channel to the United Kingdom.
Yes, the UK.
Because the UK's approach is entirely different. They are playing the role of the pragmatic innovator.
They really are. The UK has historically been very savvy about positioning its financial markets, and they're doing it again right here.
How would you summarize their philosophy?
It can be summarized in a single phrase. Regulate the activity, not the technology.
Regulate the activity, not the technology.
Exactly. They view tokenization not as some wild threat to be contained, but as a distinct competitive advantage.
So they aren't writing a new rule book.
No.
Yeah.
Instead of drafting a MiCA-style legislative monolith, the UK's Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, is heavily relying on existing financial frameworks.
So mechanically, how does that actually work? If I create a tokenized bond, are you saying the UK regulators literally don't care that it's operating on an Ethereum smart contract?
That is the essence of their tech-neutral approach.
Really?
Yeah. The FCA looks at the economic substance of what you were doing. If your token acts like a bond, if it pays yield like a bond,
Right.
and carries the risk of a bond.
Then it is a bond.
Exactly. It just follows the rules that already exist for traditional bonds.
Wow.
The FCA has told the market that tokenization is perfectly allowed, provided the underlying economic activity fits within those established definitions.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to admit, from a business perspective, that sounds like an incredibly smart competitive advantage.
It's brilliant positioning.
Right. The UK is standing on the global stage and telling the financial world, move fast, but stay compliant.
Yes.
Like, you don't have to wait for us to write a new 500-page manual. Just color inside the lines we drew 20 years ago, and you can start building today.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a deliberate market strategy. The UK is aggressively positioning itself as the alternative for innovators who look at the EU's MiCA framework and just find it entirely too restrictive.
Too slow.
Too slow, too heavy.
Yeah.
But these same innovators, they aren't reckless. They still want clear legal boundaries so they don't, end up in prison.
Always a good goal.
Right. So the UK uses tools like innovation sandboxes,
Like the EU's pilot regime.
similar. But these are environments where companies can test products with real consumers under relaxed rules, provided they share all their data with the regulator.
So they get real-world testing.
Exactly. They are trying to capture that exact middle ground. Highly flexible, but profoundly clear about what is and isn't legal.
Let me stop you there, though.
Sure.
Because applying 1990s banking rules to 2024 smart contracts sounds great in theory, but doesn't it fundamentally break the technology?
What do you mean?
Well, The whole point of a blockchain is that it is decentralized. It doesn't operate like a traditional bank with a central clearinghouse. So how do you apply old rules to a system that was specifically designed to bypass those very rules?
And there it is. That is the Achilles heel of the UK's approach.
The friction point.
Yes, and it's where the friction happens in real time. You are touching on a massive operational headache.
Because the old rules require old methods.
Right. Traditional rules often require physical signatures, specific types of banking custodians, or localized data storage.
And smart contracts just execute code.
Smart contracts do none of those things automatically. So companies in the UK often find themselves building incredible, frictionless blockchain technology.
But then what?
Then they have to build clunky, manual, off-chain administrative processes just to satisfy the old rules.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It's an imperfect marriage.
Okay, so we have the EU building a massive, rigid, predictable structure.
Right.
And we have the UK attempting this pragmatic, sometimes clunky, flexible adaptation.
The middle ground.
Yeah. But what happens when you look at the absolute largest pool of capital in their entire world and you realize they are operating without a unified playbook at all?
Ah, the United States.
Exactly. That brings us to the US.
Yeah.
And the US model is, well, based on the sources, it's an enforcement paradox.
Paradox might be putting it mildly, honestly. The U.S. landscape is defined by sheer chaotic fragmentation.
Complete chaos.
There is no single unified digital asset framework like MiCA. There is no unified tech-neutral mandate like you see in the UK.
So what is there?
Instead, you have an alphabet soup of multiple regulators with overlapping jurisdictions, all fighting for control.
Let's actually define the alphabet soup for a second, because the sources list them out, and it sounds like an absolute nightmare for anyone trying to run a business.
It really is.
I mean, you have the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. You have the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission.
Yep.
You have the OCC handling the banks. You have FINRA. And then on top of all of that, you have 50 individual state regulators.
It's staggering. Now, imagine you are a startup trying to launch a tokenized treasury bill in that environment.
Okay.
You have to ask yourself, is this a security? The SEC says yes, so you need to register with them.
Okay, simple enough.
But wait, is the underlying asset considered a commodity derivative in this specific wrapper? If so, the CFTC claims jurisdiction.
Oh boy.
Are you using traditional banking rails to move the fiat currency in and out? Now the OCC is involved.
And if I mess up?
If you guess wrong, you don't just get a warning. You get handed a massive lawsuit.
Which brings us back to my sports analogy from the very beginning. The referees are throwing penalty flags after the play is over.
Yeah.
The SEC's stance has essentially been, most tokens are securities, meaning they fall under strict laws written in the 1930s.
Yeah.
But because there isn't a clear legislative framework explaining how a digital asset is supposed to comply with the 1930s law, we end up with regulation by enforcement.
Right.
There are no clear definitions up front. You just find out you broke the rules when the subpoena arrives in the mail.
And that creates an immense, suffocating amount of uncertainty. Whether you are dealing with tokenized private credit or real estate, you are forced to navigate a completely opaque patchwork.
But let's pause right there, because this is where the sources present a massive, glaring contradiction.
Okay.
How can the U.S. possibly have the most complicated, uncertain, enforcement-heavy regulatory fog in the world, yet still be the absolute largest market for tokenized real-world assets?
It's wild, isn't it?
It makes no logical sense. It is like looking at a Wild West town where the sheriff is totally unpredictable, half the stores are currently on fire, but the saloon is completely packed, and everyone is clamoring to do business there anyway.
That's a great image.
Why are people still building there?
This raises an important question, and it's a fantastic observation. The answer really lies in the sheer, undeniable gravity of U.S. capital.
The gravity.
Yes, the U.S. model survives and paradoxically thrives on massive scale.
Okay.
We are currently in an economic environment where investors are incredibly hungry for yield. At the same time, major institutions are craving the operational efficiency that tokenization brings.
Like settling trades faster.
Exactly, the ability to settle trades instantly instead of waiting 2 days. And issuers, regardless of whether they are based in London or Singapore, desperately need access to the depth and liquidity of U.S. capital markets.
So the liquidity acts like a black hole. It just pulls everyone in, regardless of the danger.
Exactly. The prize is just too big to ignore. The result is an incredibly high-stakes environment where high uncertainty is somehow breeding high innovation.
Because they have to innovate just to survive.
Right. Companies are building and launching products despite the regulatory fog. simply because the demand from investors outweighs the risks of an SEC enforcement action.
Wow.
It is innovation driven by brute force and pure market demand.
Wow. Okay, so we've mapped out the battlefield. The EU builds structure, the UK builds innovation, and the US builds scale.
That's the landscape.
But let's bring this down to earth for you, the listener, because understanding these macro philosophies is great for a textbook, but if you are actually navigating this space right now, maybe you're looking to invest in tokenized real estate, or your company is exploring issuing a digital bond, what does this practically mean for your capital?
Because theory is only useful when it informs practice.
Exactly.
And the sources outline a very specific 5-point regulatory checklist. If you're listening to this and thinking about buying into any tokenized asset, consider this your survival guide.
Okay, let's hear it.
There are 5 invisible traps you can fall into, and the very first one is jurisdiction.
Jurisdiction, okay.
You need to know exactly where the issuer is legally regulated. Are they operating out of New York, Frankfurt, or a server in the Cayman Islands?
Because as we just established, the legal reality changes entirely based on that map.
Completely.
Okay, point number 2 on the checklist is licensing. Is the issuer actually authorized by a regulatory body?
Crucial question.
Right. And just as importantly, let's talk about the custodians.
Yes, the custodians.
The custodian is the entity actually holding the underlying asset, like the physical gold or the treasury bill. Are they regulated?
And are they bankruptcy remote?
What does that mean exactly?
Meaning, if the platform you bought the token on goes bankrupt, are your assets protected, or do they get swallowed up in the liquidation?
Oh man, that is a trap that has caught thousands of investors in the past.
It really has. And that leads directly to the third point, token classification.
Classification.
You need to understand exactly what the law says you are holding. Is the regulator going to classify this token as equity? Is it a debt instrument? Is it just a software license?
So the label matters.
The label applied to the token dictates every single legal right you have if things go wrong.
Now, point 4 is where the mechanics get really interesting. Settlement rules. How does the transaction actually finalize?
This is huge.
Because applying traditional banking settlement to a blockchain is like sending an email, but forcing the recipient's postman to print it out, walk it to their house, and get a physical signature before they can read it.
Right.
You completely kill the velocity that made the tech useful.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it.
Yeah.
And it highlights why you must ask. Is the settlement happening on-chain or off-chain?
On-chain versus off-chain.
Yes. If it's on-chain, the token and the payment swap instantly, what we call atomic settlement.
Sounds ideal.
It is. But if it's off-chain, meaning the token moves on the blockchain, but the actual money moves through traditional banking rails over the next 2 days, you have massive counterparty risk.
So what happens if the bank fails during those 2 days?
Exactly. You might have the token, but the seller never got the money.
Yikes. Which brings us to the final point on the survival guide. Investor protections.
Right.
What are the disclosure requirements? If the smart contract running the token have a bug and gets hacked, who is legally liable?
Who pays for that?
Right. And fundamentally, what are your redemption rights? If the market turns, do you have a legally binding right to hand that digital token back and get your underlying US dollars returned?
Jurisdiction, licensing, classifications, settlement, and protections.
The 5 pillars.
Yes. So, synthesizing the geographical trade-offs we've explored today. If you want absolute legal clarity and heavy consumer protection, you look for assets regulated in the EU.
Makes sense.
If you want flexibility and access to novel, rapid innovation, you look to the UK.
The pragmatists.
Right. And if you want massive capital scale, deep liquidity, and the highest potential yields, you look to the US.
Right.
But you have to accept the added volatility and legal risk that comes with playing on an unregulated field.
And the firm takeaway here for you, the listener, is simple. If any of those 5 checklist points are unclear to you when you are looking at a tokenized asset, pause.
Just stop.
Do not proceed until you have the answers. Because the technology itself is designed to make borders feel invisible. I mean, you can send a tokenized real estate share to someone in Tokyo in 3 seconds.
It's magic.
But the law makes those borders very, very real. Ignoring the regulatory reality of where an asset lives is a recipe for losing your shirt.
It really is. So to bring this all together, tokenization is an unstoppable technological shift. It is going to rewrite the plumbing of global finance.
Absolutely.
But right now, it is fundamentally a regulatory competition. The EU is methodically methodically pouring the concrete.
Building the stadium.
Right. The UK is pragmatically trying to retrofit the old rules. And the US is chaotically driving massive scale through enforcement and sheer capital gravity.
And you have to remember that regulation isn't just a barrier or a hurdle. It is literally the blueprint for the future of money.
It is.
Understanding these three distinct approaches isn't just for compliance lawyers. It is the ultimate tool you can have for navigating whatever is coming next.
And as we consider what is coming next, I want to leave you with a final thought to explore on your own.
Okay.
We know that capital behaves exactly like water. It naturally flows toward the path of least resistance and highest reward.
Right. It always finds a way.
Given that reality, will one of these three regulatory models eventually prove so overwhelmingly successful that it forces the other two to abandon their philosophies and adapt?
Oh, that's a good question.
Or, because these legal frameworks are so deeply entrenched in local history, are we destined for a permanently fractured global financial internet, where a digital dollar in Europe fundamentally doesn't work the same way as a digital dollar in New York?
Will we ever actually agree to play by the same rule book, or are we just going to keep throwing penalty flags on completely different fields?
Exactly.
It's a fascinating question to ponder. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you next time.
1, 2, 3, 2, 1.